The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the supply station, dust billowing around worn wooden wheels as Maeve Richardson stepped down onto the hard-packed earth of White Oaks, New Mexico territory, clutching a battered leather suitcase that contained everything she owned in this world. The year was 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the foothills of the Sacramento Mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She had traveled over 1,000 miles from Philadelphia after her father's death left her penniless and desperate, following a hastily scrawled address from a distant cousin who supposedly ran a boarding house here. But as Maeve stood in the dusty street, squinting against the harsh light, she realized the paper in her pocket listed an address that no one seemed to recognize. "Excuse me," she called to a weathered man lounging outside the general store. "Could you direct me to Mrs. Clara Hampton's establishment?" The man scratched his graying beard and shook his head. "No Hampton I know of, miss. You sure you got the right town?" Maeve's heart sank as she checked the letter again. White Oaks, New Mexico territory. This was definitely the right place, but apparently the wrong information. She stood there in her travel-worn dress, the fabric stained from days of journey, wondering what she would do now. The few coins in her pocket would barely buy dinner, let alone lodging for the night. "You look lost." The voice came from behind her, deep and rough like gravel shifting underfoot. Maeve turned to find a man standing a respectful distance away, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore buckskin clothing that marked him as someone who spent more time in the wilderness than civilization, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. Despite his rugged appearance, something in his expression seemed kind. "I am," Maeve admitted, seeing no point in pretense. "I came here looking for my cousin, but it seems she does not live here after all." The man studied her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her worn suitcase and desperate situation. "Xavier Emerson," he said finally, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Xave. I live up in the mountains, come down every few weeks for supplies." "Maeve Richardson," she replied, managing a small curtsy despite her exhaustion. "I apologize for bothering you with my troubles. You got anywhere to stay tonight?" The directness of the question made Maeve flush with embarrassment. "Not yet. I will find something." Xavier looked up at the sky, where the sun was already beginning its descent toward the distant peaks. "Town only has one boarding house, and it's not the kind of place a woman like you should be staying. Owner runs a saloon downstairs, and the noise goes all night." He seemed to be considering something, working through a decision in his mind. "I got a cabin about 2 hours' ride from here. It is not fancy, but it is clean and safe. You could stay there while you figure out your next steps." Maeve's Philadelphia upbringing screamed that accepting such an offer from a stranger was scandalous and dangerous, but what choice did she have? She could see the boarding house he mentioned down the street, and even from here, she could hear rough laughter and the tinny sound of an out-of-tune piano. The mountain man before her might be a stranger, but his eyes held an honesty that the town's other occupants seemed to lack. "I could not impose," she said, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Not an imposition if I am offering," Xavier replied. "I am heading back up tonight anyway. You can have the loft and I will sleep by the fire. In the morning, if you want to come back to town, I will bring you. But at least you will have had a safe night's rest and a hot meal." The offer was too generous to refuse, and Maeve found herself nodding before she could overthink it. "Thank you, Mr. Emerson. I accept your kindness." "Just Xave," he corrected, then gestured toward the general store. "Let me finish getting my supplies, and we will head out before dark." Maeve watched as he disappeared into the store, wondering what twist of fate had brought her to this moment. Everything she had known was gone. Her father, a respected schoolteacher, had died suddenly 3 months ago, and she discovered he had been supporting them on credit for years. The debts consumed everything, even the small house they had rented. Her mother had passed when Maeve was just 12, leaving no family except this phantom cousin who apparently did not exist. Xavier emerged 20 minutes later leading 2 horses, both laden with supplies. The larger of the two, a sturdy bay gelding, he mounted with practiced ease. The smaller one, a gentle-looking mare, he brought over to Maeve. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I have ridden before," Maeve said, though it had been years. Xavier helped her up onto the mare, then handed her the worn suitcase to balance across her lap. As they set off toward the mountains, Maeve took one last look at white oaks, wondering if she would ever return or if this wilderness would swallow her whole. The trail wound steadily upward through juniper and pinyon pine, the air growing cooler as they climbed. Xavier rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure Maeve was managing. She focused on staying in the saddle, her muscles already protesting the unfamiliar exertion. The landscape was unlike anything she had known in Pennsylvania, vast and open, with rock formations that jutted from the earth like ancient monuments. "How long have you lived up here?" Maeve called forward, needing to break the silence. "About 5 years now," Xavier replied without turning. "Came out west after the war. Could not settle back into regular life after everything I had seen. The war between the states. Yes, madam. Fought for the Union, saw things that made me want nothing more than solitude and peace." Maeve understood that sentiment more than he might realize. Though she had not fought in any war, the battle of survival in Philadelphia after her father's death had left its own scars. "I can understand wanting to start fresh somewhere new." Xavier glanced back at her then, something like recognition in his eyes. "I suspect you can." They rode in companionable silence for a while longer, until the trail opened up to reveal a small valley cradled between 2 mountain ridges. A creek ran through the center, its water sparkling in the fading light, and nestled near the tree line stood a cabin built from sturdy logs, smoke curling from its stone chimney. "Home," Xavier announced simply, dismounting and coming to help Maeve down. Her legs nearly buckled when she hit the ground, stiff from the ride, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Come inside. I will tend to the horses after I get you settled." The cabin's interior was rustic but surprisingly well maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire already laid and ready to light. A rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and she could see a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove in one corner. A ladder led up to a loft space above. "That is all you will ever need," Xavier said, nodding toward her worn suitcase as she set it down near the door. "Up here, fancy things do not matter much. What counts is being able to adapt and survive." Maeve looked down at her pitiful belongings and then around the sparse cabin. For the first time in months, she felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been so focused on what she had lost that she had not considered what she might gain. "Let me show you the loft," Xavier continued, climbing the ladder. Maeve followed, finding a surprisingly cozy space with a real bed covered in thick quilts and furs. A small window looked out over the valley and the view took her breath away. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "It is peaceful," Xavier agreed. "I will be right back. Make yourself comfortable." After he left to tend the horses, Maeve sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling slightly as the reality of her situation settled over her. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she had just met, miles from any semblance of civilization. By all accounts, She should be terrified. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. For the first time since her father's death, she was not surrounded by creditors and pitying neighbors. Here, no one knew her shame or her loss. Here she could simply be. Xavier returned as dusk fell, bringing with him an armload of wood for the fire. He worked efficiently, soon having a cheerful blaze going that filled the cabin with warmth. From his supplies, he pulled out bacon, beans, and coffee, setting about making dinner with the same quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything. "Can I help?" Maeve asked, feeling useless as she descended from the loft. "You know how to make coffee?" "Yes, my father and I took turns making it every morning." Xavier gestured toward the pot and supplies. "Have at it then. Fair warning, I like it strong." Working together in the small kitchen space, they prepared a simple meal. Maeve found herself relaxing in Xavier's presence. He was not a talkative man, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He asked about her journey west, and she told him about her father's death and the cruel discovery of their debts. "He was a good man," Maeve said, stirring the coffee. "But he was not practical. He gave away money to students who could not afford books, loaned funds to families in need. He died believing the best in people, never knowing how much it would cost me." "Sounds like he died with his principles intact," Xavier observed. "There are worse ways to go." "I suppose you are right. I was angry at first, but now I just miss him." They ate at the rough table, the meal simple but satisfying. Maeve could not remember the last time food had tasted so good. Perhaps it was the mountain air, or perhaps it was the absence of worry for the first time in months. After dinner, Xavier pulled out a deck of worn cards. "You play rummy?" he asked. Maeve smiled. "My father taught me, though I should warn you I am quite good." "We will see about that." They played by firelight, and Maeve was surprised to find herself laughing at Xavier's dry commentary when she won 3 hands in a row. His serious demeanor occasionally cracked to reveal a subtle humor that delighted her. As the night grew late, Xavier banked the fire and laid out his bedroll near the hearth while Maeve climbed to the loft. Lying in the comfortable bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness outside, Maeve felt tears prick her eyes. But they were not tears of sadness. For the first time since arriving in New Mexico territory, she felt a fragile hope taking root in her chest. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight she was safe, fed, and warm. That was more than she had dared hope for when she stepped off that stagecoach. Morning came with golden light streaming through the loft window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Maeve dressed quickly in her only other dress, a simple gray cotton that was hardly better than the one she had traveled in, and climbed down to find Xavier already cooking breakfast. "Sleep well?" he asked, glancing up from the skillet. "Better than I have in months," Maeve admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Xavier just nodded, plating up eggs and bacon. As they ate, he seemed to be considering something. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I have been thinking about your situation," he began. "Truth is, I could use some help around here. Winter is coming in a few months, and there is a lot of work to be done. Preserving food, chopping wood, mending things that have fallen into disrepair. If you were willing to stay and work, I could provide room and board. Would give you time to figure out your next move without having to rush into something desperate down in town." Maeve's heart skipped. The offer was generous, perhaps too generous, and she had to ask the question that hung between them. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "5 years ago, I was in a bad way. Drinking too much, fighting, could not find my place in the world after the war. A man named Samuel took a chance on me, gave me work on his ranch, helped me get my feet under me. He died 2 years back, but I have never forgotten what he did. Maybe this is my way of paying that forward." The honesty in his voice convinced Maeve more than any flowery speech could have. "I accept," she said. "I will work hard, I promise you that." "I do not doubt it," Xavier replied. "Now, let me show you around the property, and we can figure out what needs doing first." The next weeks fell into a rhythm that Maeve had never experienced, but found herself embracing. Xavier was a patient teacher, showing her how to identify edible plants, how to preserve vegetables in salt and vinegar, how to chop wood without injuring herself. Her hands, soft from years of city living, developed blisters that hardened into calluses. Her arms grew stronger from carrying water from the creek and kneading bread dough. In turn, Maeve brought her own skills to the arrangement. She organized Xavier's chaotic supply shelves, mended his worn clothing with neat stitches, and introduced some variety to their meals with recipes her father had taught her. She scrubbed the cabin until it shone, hung curtains she sewed from spare fabric, and created a small herb garden near the door. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts. Xavier told her about growing up on a farm in Ohio, about the horrors of Gettysburg and Antietam, about finding peace in these mountains. Maeve spoke of Philadelphia's streets, of her mother's death from cholera, of the books she and her father had loved. "You miss teaching?" Xavier asked one afternoon as they worked on repairing the cabin's roof. "I was never a teacher," Maeve replied, handing him another shingle, "but I loved learning. My father taught me literature, history, even some mathematics. He said a sharp mind was the best inheritance he could give me." He was right about that. "You picked up everything I have shown you faster than anyone I have ever known." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Over the weeks, Maeve had become increasingly aware of Xavier's presence, the way his hands moved with such certainty when working, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness he showed when teaching her something new. She found herself watching for him when he went hunting, feeling relief when he returned safely. One evening in early October, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The air had turned crisp, promising the winter to come. Xavier had been quiet all day, and Maeve could sense something weighing on his mind. "I need to make a run to Santa Fe next week," he said finally. "Stock up on supplies before the snow comes. Trip will take about a week there and back." "Oh," Maeve said, trying to hide her disappointment at the thought of him leaving. "I was thinking you might want to come along." Santa Fe is a real city, bigger than White Oaks, might have opportunities for someone with your education. The suggestion felt like cold water. Of course. Their arrangement had always been temporary, a way for her to get on her feet. Xavier was giving her an opportunity to move on, to find a real position somewhere. It was thoughtful of him, practical even. So why did the thought make her chest ache? "That is very kind of you to think of my future," she managed. Xavier was quiet for a moment. "It is the smart thing," he said, though his voice carried no enthusiasm. "A woman like you should not be stuck in the wilderness with an old hermit." "You are not old," Maeve said, "and I do not feel stuck." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Maeve, I need to be straight with you about something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it?" "When I offered you this arrangement, it was with good intentions. Give you a safe place, time to recover from your losses. But things have gotten complicated." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had rarely seen from him. "I find myself looking forward to seeing you at breakfast. I listen for your voice when I am working outside. When I am in town, I think about getting back here, and it is not because of the cabin." "Xavier," Maeve whispered, barely able to believe what she was hearing. I know I have no right, he continued, standing up and pacing the length of the porch. You are educated, refined, young. You could have a real life in a city, marry someone appropriate. I am just a man who hides in the mountains because I fit nowhere else. But I need you to know, before we go to Santa Fe, that if you choose to stay, it would not just be as someone who works for room and board. It would be because I care for you, and I hope that maybe you care for me too. Maeve stood and crossed to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. I was dreading you leaving for Santa Fe because I realized I have grown to care for you too. These weeks here have been the happiest of my life, not because of the mountains or the cabin, but because of you. The way you listen when I talk, the way you teach with such patience, the way you see me as capable when everyone else in my life only saw what I lacked. Xavier's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite his calluses. Are you certain? Once we cross this line, I will not want to go back. I will want you to stay to build a life here with me. I am certain, Maeve said, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something that spoke of all the longing they had both been suppressing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. We should still go to Santa Fe, he said. But for different reasons now, we will need to find a preacher. Maeve laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. Are you proposing Xavier Emerson? I suppose I am, though I am doing a poor job of it. He took both her hands in his. Maeve Richardson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I cannot promise you a fancy life, but I can promise you honesty, respect, and all the love I have to give. Yes, Maeve said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They held each other as the stars began to appear overhead, and Maeve marveled at how completely her life had transformed. 2 months ago, she had arrived with nothing but a worn suitcase and crushing despair. Now she stood in the arms of a good man, with a home and a future she had never dared imagine. The week before their departure for Santa Fe passed in a blur of preparation and stolen kisses. They worked side by side as always, but now there was an ease between them, a comfort in casual touches and shared glances. Xavier became more talkative, sharing dreams of expanding the cabin, maybe raising some livestock, building a life that could support a family someday. You want children? Maeve asked one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. I do, Xavier admitted. If you do, I always thought I would live alone up here, but now I can imagine this place filled with life. Kids running around, learning to fish in the creek, helping with the garden. I want that too, Maeve said. A family. A real home. The journey to Santa Fe was beautiful and arduous in equal measure. They rode through changing aspens, their leaves golden against the blue sky, and camped under more stars than Maeve had known existed. Xavier was attentive and respectful, setting up separate bedrolls and maintaining proper distance despite their engagement. We will do this right, he insisted when Maeve teased him about it. I want you to have no regrets, no questions about propriety. Santa Fe amazed Maeve with its unique architecture and blend of cultures. They found lodging at a respectable boarding house, taking separate rooms, and spent their days gathering supplies and making arrangements. They found a priest who agreed to marry them, a kindly older man who seemed charmed by their story. You are certain about this? The priest asked Maeve privately. You have only known this man a short time. I am more certain of this than anything in my life, Maeve replied. He is a good man, Father. He sees me for who I am, not what society says I should be. The wedding took place in a small chapel on a crisp October morning. Maeve wore a simple blue dress they had purchased in town, and Xavier had trimmed his beard and wore a new shirt. They had no guests except the priest and 2 witnesses pulled from the street, but Maeve had never seen anything more beautiful than Xavier's eyes as he pledged himself to her. "I, Xavier, take you, Maeve, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his deep voice steady and sure. "I promise to honor you, protect you, and love you all the days of my life." When it was Maeve's turn, her voice trembled with emotion. "I, Maeve, take you, Xavier, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you, to build a life with you, and to love you always." The kiss they shared as husband and wife was sweet and full of promise. That night, in a hotel room Xavier had splurged on, they truly became one. He was gentle and patient, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Maeve had never known such intimacy was possible, such a profound connection of both body and soul. "I love you," Xavier whispered as they lay entwined afterward. "I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Maeve replied, tracing the scars on his chest from the war. "You saved me, Xavier, not just from poverty or danger, but from a life where I would have always felt like I was not enough. With you, I feel like I am exactly who I am meant to be." They spent 3 more days in Santa Fe, enjoying the luxury of sleeping late and eating meals they did not have to cook. But both were eager to return to the mountain cabin, to begin their married life in earnest. The journey back felt faster, buoyed by their happiness and plans for the future. Winter descended on the mountains with surprising swiftness. By late November, snow blanketed the valley, and they found themselves snowed in for days at a time. But rather than feeling trapped, Maeve reveled in the cozy isolation. They spent long evenings by the fire, with Xavier teaching her to play chess, and Maeve reading aloud from books they had purchased in Santa Fe. Their physical relationship deepened and grew, and Maeve discovered a passion she had never known existed within her. Xavier was an attentive lover, always ensuring her pleasure matched his own. In the warmth of their bed, beneath the heavy quilts, they created their own world where nothing existed beyond their love for each other. "I never knew marriage could be like this," Maeve confessed one snowy afternoon as they lay together in the loft. "My parents loved each other, but they were so formal, so reserved. This feels like being friends and lovers all at once." "That is what it should be," Xavier said, running his fingers through her hair. "Partners in everything." As winter wore on, Maeve began to suspect she might be carrying their child. She waited to be certain, not wanting to raise Xavier's hopes prematurely, but by late January she was sure. She planned how to tell him, wanting it to be special despite their simple circumstances. On a clear February day, when Xavier returned from checking his trap lines, Maeve had prepared his favorite meal and set the table with unusual care. She wore her blue wedding dress, and Xavier noticed immediately. "What is the occasion?" he asked, a smile playing at his lips. "Sit down and I will tell you," Maeve said, her heart racing with excitement. Xavier sat, watching her with curious eyes as she took the chair across from him. "I have some news," she began. "Come late summer, our family is going to grow. You are going to be a father, Xavier." The expression that crossed his face was one of pure joy. He stood so quickly his chair tipped backward, and in 2 strides he had her in his arms, lifting her off her feet. "Truly." "You are certain?" "Truly," Maeve laughed. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said, setting her down carefully as if she were suddenly made of glass. "You have given me everything, Maeve. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I swear I will be the best father I can be." That night, they talked late into the evening about names and plans. Xavier wanted to expand the cabin before the baby came, adding a proper bedroom below so Maeve would not have to climb the ladder while pregnant. They discussed whether to hope for a boy or girl, ultimately agreeing that a healthy child was all that mattered. "Though I confess I hope for a boy first," Xavier admitted. "One who looks like his beautiful mother but is tough enough to handle mountain life. And I hope for a daughter who has her father's kind heart and strength," Maeve countered. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal green meadows dotted with wildflowers. As Maeve's belly swelled with their growing child, Xavier worked tirelessly on the cabin expansion. He was determined to have it finished before the baby arrived, and often worked late into the evening by lantern light. Maeve helped where she could, though Xavier insisted she not overexert herself. She sewed baby clothes from soft fabric, prepared a cradle Xavier had carved from pine, and preserved foods for the months after the birth when she might be too tired to cook properly. She had never been happier, her days filled with purpose and love. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Xavier asked one evening in late spring as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Maeve considered the question honestly. "I miss my father sometimes, wish he could have met you and known about the baby. But the city itself? No, I do not miss the crowds or the noise or the constant judgment. Here I can breathe. Here I can be myself." "I am glad," Xavier said, taking her hand, "because I cannot imagine this life without you." In early August, on a warm afternoon when the sky stretched endlessly blue above them, Maeve's labor began. Xavier rode down to White Oaks to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The hours that followed were long and difficult, but Xavier never left Maeve's side, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement. "You are the strongest person I know," he told her during a particularly hard contraction. "You can do this." Finally, as evening fell, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, cleaning the squalling infant and placing him in Maeve's arms. "A big, healthy boy." Maeve looked down at her son, at his tiny face scrunched in protest and his dark hair that matched his father's, and felt tears stream down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Xavier knelt beside the bed, his eyes wet as he gazed at his wife and son. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Maeve." They named him Samuel, after the man who had given Xavier a second chance, and from the moment he entered the world, little Sam transformed their lives completely. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Sam when he was fussy, changing dirty cloths without complaint, singing old songs in his rough voice until the baby fell asleep. Maeve recovered quickly from the birth, her body adapting to the demands of motherhood. She nursed Sam while watching the mountains through the window, marveling at how full her life had become. The worn suitcase that had once held all her worldly possessions now sat in a corner, filled with Sam's outgrown clothes, a reminder of how far she had come. As Sam grew from infant to toddler, the cabin rang with his laughter and the sound of small feet running across wooden floors. Xavier taught him to walk by leading him around the vegetable garden, taught him his first words by naming everything they saw on walks through the forest. Maeve taught him gentle hands with animals and a love of stories, reading to him every night before bed. "I want more," Maeve told Xavier one night when Sam was 2 years old. "More children. I want this place filled with love and laughter." "Then we will have more," Xavier agreed, pulling her close. "As many as you want." Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, came when Sam was 3. She was a calm baby where Sam had been fussy, happy to observe the world with wide blue eyes that matched Maeve's. 2 years later came another boy, Thomas, who seemed determined to keep up with his older brother from the moment he could crawl. The cabin expanded further to accommodate their growing family, with Xavier adding on rooms and a larger kitchen. They acquired chickens for eggs, a milk cow, and a few head of cattle. What had started as a hermit's retreat became a thriving homestead, full of life and possibility. Maeve discovered she had a gift for teaching, and as the children grew, she created lessons for them using books ordered from back east. Xavier taught them practical skills like hunting, fishing, and tracking. Together, they raised children who were equally comfortable with Shakespeare and survival skills, who could discuss philosophy while skinning a rabbit. When Sam turned 10, they faced their first real crisis. He fell from a tree while playing, breaking his arm badly. The nearest doctor was in White Oaks, and Xavier rode through the night to fetch him. Maeve sat with her son, keeping him calm and still despite his pain, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. "You are so brave," she told Sam as they waited. "Your father will be back soon with help." "It hurts, Ma," Sam said through tears. "I know, sweetheart, but you are strong like your father. You will get through this." The doctor set the bone and assured them Sam would heal completely. The experience reminded Maeve how fragile life could be, how precious each moment with her family was. That night, after the children were all asleep, she held Xavier close. "We are blessed," she said. "I know life is not always easy up here, but we are so blessed." "We are," Xavier agreed. "Every day I wake up and wonder how I got so lucky." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. They added a fourth child, another daughter named Julia, who proved to be as adventurous as her brothers. The children grew tall and strong, each developing their own personalities and interests. Sam showed Xavier's quiet competence and love of the wilderness. Rose had her mother's love of learning and gentle nature. Thomas was the comedian of the family, always finding ways to make everyone laugh. Julia was fearless, climbing higher and running faster than her siblings ever had. As the children approached their teenage years, Maeve and Xavier discussed the need to provide them with opportunities beyond the mountain. They made more frequent trips to Santa Fe, exposing the children to culture and education. But always, they returned to the mountain cabin with relief, all of them agreeing it was where they belonged. "You think they will stay here when they grow up?" Maeve asked Xavier one evening as they watched their children play by the creek. "I think they will each find their own path," Xavier replied. "But we have given them roots deep enough that they can always come home." When Maeve turned 40, Xavier threw her a surprise party, inviting the few neighbors scattered throughout the mountains and some friends from White Oaks. Maeve was overwhelmed by the gesture, by the realization of how many lives they had touched in their years there. People spoke of Xavier's generosity, of times he had helped them through harsh winters or difficult situations. They spoke of Maeve's kindness, of her willingness to teach their children or help with complicated problems. "You are both pillars of this community," Mrs. Chen said, the midwife who had delivered all 4 of their children. "This mountain would be a lonelier place without you." As the party wound down and the guests departed, Maeve and Xavier stood together on their porch, now expanded and comfortable, watching the sun set over peaks that had become as familiar as their own faces. 20 years, Maeve said softly. 20 years since I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but a worn suitcase and desperation. "And I told you that was all you would ever need," Xavier reminded her. "Do you remember? How could I forget? I thought you were crazy at the time. How could one suitcase be enough?" Xavier turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. His hair was threaded with gray now, and lines had appeared at the corners of his eyes, but to Maeve, he was as handsome as the day they met. "It was enough because you were enough. Everything else we built together." "We did not we?" Maeve said, looking back at the cabin that had become a home, thinking of the children sleeping inside who were their greatest accomplishment. We built something beautiful. Sam left for college in Santa Fe when he turned 18, the first of their children to leave the mountain. It was hard watching him go, but Maeve and Xavier were proud of the young man he had become, thoughtful and capable. He wrote regularly, describing his studies in medicine and his plans to return someday as a doctor for the mountain communities. Rose followed 2 years later, passionate about teaching and determined to get formal training. She promised to come back and start a school in White Oaks, where children could get proper education without leaving the territory. Thomas surprised them all by announcing he wanted to study law, while Julia declared she would never leave the mountains, that this was where she belonged. 1 out of 4 is not bad, Xavier joked when Julia made her announcement at 16. At least we know the homestead will stay in the family. As their children pursued their dreams, Maeve and Xavier found themselves alone again for the first time in decades. The cabin felt empty without the constant noise and activity, but they quickly adapted, rediscovering the quiet intimacy of their early years together. "I feel like we are starting over," Maeve said one morning as they drank coffee on the porch, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. "In a way we are," Xavier agreed. "But this time we know what we are doing." They took long walks through the mountains, visited more frequently with neighbors, and spent evenings reading or playing cards like they had in the beginning. Their love had matured and deepened over the years, becoming something steady and unshakable. They knew each other's rhythms, could communicate with a glance, and still found joy in simple moments together. Sam returned after finishing his medical training, setting up practice in White Oaks just as he had promised. He married a sweet girl named Elizabeth he had met in school, and they gave Maeve and Xavier their first grandchildren, twin boys who loved visiting the mountain cabin. Rose came home too, opening her school and marrying a rancher from a neighboring valley. Thomas was the only one who stayed away, building a successful law practice in Albuquerque, though he visited several times a year. Julia never left, though she eventually married a homesteader who understood her connection to the mountains. They built their own cabin a mile from Xavier and Maeve's, close enough for daily visits but far enough for independence. Julia gave them 3 granddaughters who were as wild and free as their mother. At 55, Maeve looked at her life with a sense of profound gratitude. She had 8 grandchildren, 4 successful children, and a marriage that had weathered every storm. The worn suitcase sat in a corner of the bedroom now, used only when they occasionally traveled, a reminder of the scared woman who had arrived with nothing. "You have any regrets?" Xavier asked her one night as they prepared for bed. He was 60 now, still strong but moving a bit slower than he once had. Maeve considered the question seriously. "Not a single one. Every choice led me here to this life to you. How could I regret any of it?" "Good," Xavier said, pulling her into his arms, "because I feel the same way." The years continued to pass, marked by births and marriages, by seasons changing and children growing. Xavier taught his grandsons to hunt and fish, passing on skills he had learned from his own father. Maeve taught her granddaughters to read and sew, but also to be strong and independent. Together, they created a legacy of love and resilience that would last for generations. When Maeve turned 65, the entire family gathered for a celebration. The cabin could not hold everyone, so they set up outside, tables laden with food and children running everywhere. Sam gave a toast, thanking his parents for showing him what true love looked like. Rose spoke of her mother's strength and wisdom. Thomas, visiting from Albuquerque, talked about the sacrifices his parents had made to give their children opportunities. Julia simply hugged them both, tears streaming down her face, and said that she hoped to love as deeply and truly as they had. "You are already doing it," Maeve assured her youngest daughter. "You all are. That is the greatest gift we could ask for." As the party continued around them, Xavier took Maeve's hand and led her away from the crowd, up a familiar trail to a viewpoint overlooking the valley. They had come here countless times over the years, in joy and sorrow, in contemplation and celebration. 42 years, Xavier said, looking out at the vista bathed in golden evening light. "We have been married 42 years. "The best 42 years of my life," Maeve replied, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes I think about that scared girl who stepped off the stagecoach and I barely recognize her." "I do," Xavier said. "She was brave enough to trust a stranger, strong enough to adapt to a completely new life, and smart enough to see what really mattered. She is still there in you, Maeve, just weathered and wiser like this old mountain." Maeve laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "We are both weathered and wiser, but I would not change a thing. Not even the hard times, the winters we barely had enough food, the times when sickness came, when you nearly died giving birth to Thomas. Not even those," Maeve said firmly. "Because we faced them together and they made us stronger. They taught our children resilience. Hard times are part of life, Xavier. What matters is who you face them with." Xavier kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "I love you, Maeve Emerson. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "And I love you," Maeve replied. "Always and forever." They stood together as the sun set and the stars began to appear, the sounds of their family's laughter floating up from below. The mountain stood eternal and unchanging around them, witness to their love story, guardian of their happiness. In the years that followed, they slowed down as age demanded, but their love never diminished. Xavier's hands grew stiff with arthritis, so Maeve took over more of the detailed work. Maeve's eyesight faded, so Xavier read to her in the evenings, their roles from long ago reversed. They supported each other through each challenge, their partnership as strong at 70 as it had been at 30. The grandchildren brought their own children to visit, and the cabin saw a fourth generation learning to love the mountains. Xavier told stories of the old days to wide-eyed great-grandchildren, while Maeve taught them songs and showed them how to bake bread. The worn suitcase had long since fallen apart, but Maeve kept a piece of the leather in a special box, a tangible link to the day her real life began. On a clear autumn day, when Maeve was 78 and Xavier was 83, they took their customary morning coffee on the porch. The air was crisp and clean, the aspens golden against the evergreens, the sky impossibly blue. It was the kind of morning that reminded them why they had fallen in love with this place. "Beautiful day," Xavier observed, his voice still carrying the deep timbre she loved, though age had roughened it further. "Perfect," Maeve agreed. "Makes me think of the day we met, remember? It was autumn then, too. I remember thinking you were the prettiest thing I had ever seen, standing there in that dusty street looking lost and determined at the same time. And I remember thinking you were the most intimidating man I had ever encountered, with your beard and buckskins. I was terrified accepting your offer to come up here. But you did it anyway," Xavier said with pride. "You always were braver than you gave yourself credit for." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the morning unfold. Deer grazed in the meadow below and an eagle circled overhead. It was a scene they had witnessed thousands of times, yet it never lost its wonder. "Xavier," Maeve said eventually, "thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me a chance when I had nothing, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable, for building this life with me." Xavier squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with moisture. "I should be thanking you. You took a broken soldier who could not face the world and helped him heal. You filled my empty cabin with love and laughter. You gave me a family I never dreamed I could have. Every good thing in my life came from the day you arrived with that worn suitcase. And you told me it was all I would ever need," Maeve said with a soft laugh. "You were right, you know. Everything I needed was already inside me. I just needed the right place and the right person to help me find it." "We found it together," Xavier corrected. "Neither of us would have made it alone." As the sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold, they remained on their porch, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Their children would carry on their legacy. Their grandchildren would tell their story, and the mountains would stand as they always had, eternal witnesses to a love that had transformed two broken people into something whole. That night, surrounded by family who had come for Sunday dinner, Maeve looked around the expanded cabin at the faces she loved. Sam and his wife, their sons now young men themselves. Rose and her husband, their children growing into fine young people. Thomas and his family, visiting from the city. Julia and her brood, as wild and wonderful as ever. And Xavier, her Xavier, sitting at the head of the table where he belonged. "I want to say something," Maeve announced, and the chatter quieted. "Your father and I have been blessed beyond measure. We came together with nothing, really. He had his cabin and his solitude, and I had a worn suitcase and desperation. But we built all of this." She gestured around at the family, the home, the life they had created. "Love did this. The kind of love that works hard, that forgives, that grows stronger through challenges. I hope you all remember that. Material things do not matter. What matters is the people you love and the life you build together." "Here, here," Sam said, raising his glass. "To Ma and Pa, the best example of true love any of us could ask for." Everyone drank, and Maeve felt Xavier's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and the grandchildren were playing outside in the twilight, Xavier pulled Maeve onto the porch for their evening ritual. "Tired?" he asked, settling into his chair with a slight groan. "A bit," Maeve admitted, "but happy tired. The best kind." They rocked slowly, watching the stars emerge one by one. Maeve thought about the journey that had brought her here from Philadelphia's crowded streets to this mountain paradise. She thought about the scared woman who had trusted a stranger and the life that simple act of faith had created. "No regrets?" Xavier asked, as he often did. "Not a single one," Maeve replied, as she always answered. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner," Xavier said. "Think of all the years we could have had together if we had met when we were younger." "But we might not have been ready for each other then," Maeve pointed out. "You needed your time in the mountains to heal from the war. I needed to learn who I was beyond my father's shadow. We met exactly when we were supposed to." "You are right, as usual," Xavier said with a chuckle. "Wise woman I married." "Wise man who married me," Maeve countered, making him laugh. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, the sounds of their family drifting from inside, Maeve felt a profound peace settle over her. This was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or wealthy displays, but this. Family, love, mountains that stood eternal, and a hand to hold through it all. The years that followed brought inevitable changes. They slowed further, spending more time on the porch and less time working. Their children worried, suggesting they might want to move to town to be closer to doctors and conveniences. But Maeve and Xavier refused. "We will stay here," Xavier insisted. "This is our home. We will leave it when we leave this world, not before." Their children understood, because they had been raised to understand the deep connection between a person and the land they love. Instead of forcing them to move, the family took turns staying with them, ensuring they were never alone, that help was always nearby. When Xavier turned 90, the whole family gathered again. He sat in his chair on the porch, looking out at mountains he had called home for over 60 years, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who existed because a lonely mountain man had once taken a chance on a desperate woman. "Make a wish, Pa," little Emma, one of his great-granddaughters, insisted, holding up a cake with too many candles. Xavier looked at Maeve, his eyes as blue and true as they had been the day they met. "I have everything I could ever wish for right here," he said. "But I suppose I wish for one more good year with my beautiful wife." Maeve's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "One more good year," she agreed. At least, they got that year and several more. They celebrated Maeve's 85th birthday surrounded by family. They watched another great-grandchild be born, their legacy continuing into a new generation. They took slow walks through the meadow, remembering when they could hike for hours. They sat on their porch, hands linked, as they had done for decades. On a peaceful spring morning, when Maeve was 87 and Xavier 92, they sat in their customary spots drinking coffee. The valley was alive with new growth, flowers blooming in riots of color, birds singing their morning songs. Xavier was quieter than usual, and Maeve sensed something weighing on him. "What is it, love?" she asked. Xavier was silent for a long moment, then said, "I have been thinking about that first day when you stepped off that coach with your worn suitcase. You looked so small and scared, but there was steel in you even then. I knew in that moment that you were special, that helping you would change my life. I just did not know how much." "It changed both our lives," Maeve said, "in the best possible way. I want you to know," Xavier continued, "that every single day with you has been a gift, even the hard days, even when we argued or struggled. All of it was worth it because I got to spend it with you." Maeve moved to sit on the arm of his chair, and he wrapped an arm around her waist. "I know," she said softly. "I feel the same way. You saved me, Xavier, not just from poverty or loneliness, but you saved my soul. You showed me what love really meant." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, neither needing to speak, their hearts communicating in the language they had developed over decades of marriage. When Julia arrived later that morning to check on them, she found them just like that, wrapped in each other's arms, peaceful smiles on their faces. Xavier had passed quietly sometime during the morning, his heart simply stopping after 92 years of beating. Maeve had followed within the hour, her body knowing that a life without Xavier was no life at all. They had left together, as they had done everything for over 60 years. The family mourned them deeply, but there was also a recognition that it was fitting that two people who had loved so completely should not be separated even by death. They were buried on the mountain they loved, on a hill overlooking the valley, beneath trees they had planted decades ago. At the funeral, Sam stood to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "My parents taught us that love is not about grand gestures. It is about showing up every day. It is about working side by side. It is about building something together that lasts." They came together with almost nothing and created everything that mattered. That is the legacy they leave us. The cabin remained in the family, passed down to Julia, and then to her children, each generation adding their own touches while preserving the core that Maeve and Xavier had built. The worn piece of leather from Maeve's original suitcase was framed and hung on the wall, with a small plaque that read, "She arrived with nothing but a worn suitcase. The mountain man said that is all you will ever need. Together they proved that love is all you ever need." Years turned to decades, and the story of Xavier and Maeve became a family legend, passed down to new generations. Great-great-grandchildren played in the meadow where their ancestors had worked and loved. The cabin expanded and modernized but kept its essential character. And on clear evenings, when the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset, they swore they could feel the presence of the couple who had started it all, still watching over the place they loved. The mountains stood eternal as they always had and always would, guardian of a love story that had transformed two solitary souls into a family legacy. The valley bloomed each spring and quieted each winter, marking time in the way mountains do, patient and permanent. And somewhere in the whisper of wind through the pines, in the babble of the creek, in the call of eagles overhead, the love of Xavier and Maeve lived on, a testament to the truth that when two people commit to building a life together, with nothing but faith and determination, they can create something that endures long after they are gone. The story of a scared woman with a worn suitcase and a mountain man who saw her worth became a reminder to every generation that followed. That home is not a place but a person. That love is built through shared work and weathered storms. And that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a leap of faith into the unknown. Maeve had taken that leap when she climbed onto a horse and rode into the mountains with a stranger. Xavier had taken it when he opened his solitary life to another person. Together, they had created something beautiful, lasting, and true, proving that all you really need is love and the courage to build a life around it.